Nancy was the pride of her village, a young teenager devoted to God and service. Her diligence in the church and pure heart made her a role model for young girls and a joy to the elderly. Parents often pointed to her as an example, praising her unwavering faith and willingness to do the things of God. As the only child of Mr. and Mrs. Abel, Nancy had been raised in a devout household. Her family's faith was rooted in the teachings of Pastor Isaiah, a charismatic preacher who had gained the unwavering loyalty of the villagers. To them, he was a man of God, beyond reproach, and the very pillar of their community. Nancy's devotion to the church was unmatched. She was the first to arrive and the last to leave, sweeping floors, arranging chairs, and scrubbing the altar. One fateful Sunday, after a particularly powerful service, Nancy stayed behind to clean the church as usual. As the rain began to pour heavily outside, Nancy sat quietly in a corner, waiting for it to subside. The sound of the rain masked all other noises, and she was startled when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Pastor Isaiah standing there. "You are truly a vessel of God," he said warmly. "Come with me to my office. I want to anoint you for your upcoming exams." Trusting him completely, Nancy followed him. But what unfolded in that office shattered her faith and innocence. Pastor Isaiah betrayed her trust, taking advantage of her vulnerability. Her cries for help were drowned by the storm outside. When it was over, she fled the church, her heart heavy with pain and confusion. She couldn't speak of what had happened until days later when she gathered the courage to confide in her parents. But their response was not what she expected. "Stop this nonsense," her father thundered. "How dare you tell such lies against a man of God?" Her mother added, "You must have fallen into sin yourself and now want to drag Pastor Isaiah into your guilt. Don't you ever mention this again." Nancy bore the burden alone. She focused on her exams but stopped attending church. People in the village began to whisper, but most assumed she was simply busy with her studies. Weeks later, Nancy fell ill. A visit to the doctor confirmed her worst fear: she was pregnant. When her parents demanded to know who the father was, Nancy told them the truth. But they refused to believe her. "Enough of this wickedness," her mother said angrily. Her father shook his head in disappointment. "You've brought shame upon this family." The news spread like wildfire, and the villagers turned against Nancy. Pastor Isaiah publicly denied the accusations, preaching that the devil often used the faithful to bring down men of God. Nancy became a target of scorn and ridicule, and when she gave birth to a baby boy, the condemnation grew even louder. She named him Emmanuel, finding comfort in his name despite the pain surrounding his existence. Years passed, and Emmanuel grew into a strong, intelligent boy. But as he grew, his resemblance to Pastor Isaiah became impossible to ignore. The villagers, who had once condemned Nancy, began to whisper among themselves. The boy's eyes, his gait, and even the way he smiled mirrored Pastor Isaiah's. One day, during a church gathering, an elderly woman who had always believed Nancy stood up. "I've seen that child grow, and I see the truth in his face. This boy is the image of Pastor Isaiah. How much longer will we ignore the truth?" Her words caused an uproar. The villagers began to demand answers. Pastor Isaiah, cornered by the growing tension, tried to dismiss the claims. "Do not let the devil sow doubt among us," he declared. But his voice lacked its usual authority, and the villagers noticed his unease. One evening, Nancy, carrying Emmanuel, walked into the church during a service. Her presence silenced the congregation. She stood before Pastor Isaiah, her voice steady but filled with pain. "I have suffered for years because of your betrayal. You stole my innocence and my faith, and then you allowed me to carry this burden alone. Look at this child, Pastor Isaiah, and tell the people the truth." The congregation turned to Pastor Isaiah, their once blind faith now replaced with doubt. Pastor Isaiah, unable to deny the striking resemblance, fell to his knees. "I have sinned," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I allowed my weakness to overcome me. I failed Nancy, I failed this church, and I failed God." Pastor Isaiah's confession shocked the village. His reputation was destroyed, and his once flourishing church crumbled. He left the village in disgrace, never to return. Nancy, though deeply scarred, found strength in her son. The villagers, ashamed of how they had treated her, sought her forgiveness. Slowly, Nancy rebuilt her life, finding solace in her renewed faith and the unconditional love of Emmanuel. Her story became a lesson for the village, a reminder that blind faith in man can lead to destruction and that true faith lies in God alone. And though the scars of her past remained, Nancy's strength and resilience shone brighter, inspiring others to stand for the truth, no matter the cost.